Hello and welcome to your Sowing and Growing podcast. I'm your host, Iona Chisholm, and I'm joined by a very special guest today. He was a garden centre manager at Lichfield Garden Centre for 14 years. He was a radio show breakfast presenter and apparently producer of the dance music programme for 3 years. But I think you will know him better as the owner and proprietor of Lichfield Garden Centre at Cubra, a post that he's held since 2013. It's a great welcome to Byron Lewis.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well. How are you?
Good, not too bad. Getting back behind the seat again after a few years off
doing
the radio, yeah.
I mean, I thought I'd got a gardening expert in the studio, but I've got a radio expert
Well, you might have a gardening expert. I'm not sure about that. We'll find out as the half hour goes on, we'll see.
We'll just do what we can together, shall we? Oh, it's lovely to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
So we've had a few podcast episodes of Sowing and Growing so far, so we have a few regular features.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you to help me today as we go through those regular features.
Okay.
That's okay?
Right, we'll see. Okay, we'll see how it goes.
You're going to be fine. So we like to start out by setting the scene, and we call that, how does your garden and allotment grow? So, of course, we're in early February at the moment, Byron. How do you think the garden and allotments are looking at the moment?
Well, hopefully you haven't been walking the lawn too much because it's probably very, very wet after the winter weather we've had and the snow and the ice, and then obviously it thaws out and it's just a mud bath. My lawn, which isn't the best, I have to say. My lawn hasn't been walked on for probably since October of last year, so it's now resembling a bit of a meadow, but just hold fire before you do anything with that yet. Bulbs should be pushing through the ground now, so you should be seeing the first signs of crocuses, snowdrops, irises, that kind of thing, a little bit of winter colour, and they are very tough plants, so even if there is more snow on the way this month, they'll push through no problem at all. Things like cyclamen, the very hardy cyclamen, are good as well. Out in the shrub world, you'll be seeing things like magnolias and lots of buds on your camellias starting as well, so lots of things to look forward to. Spring is about to burst through, I think, shall we say.
Absolutely. It's a hopeful time, isn't it? I'm getting that picture that you go out in the garden and things are there. And actually, I went and walked in the garden yesterday, and the daffodil bulbs, the bluebell bulbs, all that foliage is really pushing through.
It's a promising time. It's a promising start.
Time, isn't it?
Even though the plant world can be confused by the weather sometimes, most things eventually right themselves, and bulbs tend to know when to flower correctly and the right time of year as well. So it all comes back into sync eventually, yeah.
Although having said that, it's a funny time, isn't it? Because I feel like we have primroses in flower the whole of the year now.
You can do for a lot of the year sometimes, yes, and then occasionally we get bulbs that flower the wrong time, but generally they know exactly when they're meant to be doing their thing. So hopefully your garden will be coming into flower soon.
That's it. Nature's in charge, isn't it?
That's it.
And of course, we've talked generally about some of the things that you will be noticing in the garden at the moment, but we like on Sowing and Growing to pick out a plant that's really strutting its stuff in the border, and we call that the rod stew plant. So what for you at the moment, Byron, is the rod stew plant? What plants do you think are really shining?
I guess at the minute, the brightest thing you're probably going to see will be the buds and maybe the flowers, if you're lucky enough, on the forsythia. That's bright yellow.
Oh, it's fantastic, isn't it?
And you'll be starting to see that from the end of February through until about the middle to the end of March. The buds will be showing a bit of colour possibly now if the weather's turned all right. So bright yellows on the forsythia is very nice, traditional hedgerow plants, I guess, really, but brilliant as a specimen plant, ideal in a container on its own as well. And also, sticking with the yellow theme, things like witch hazel, because they're coming into flower now. And again, both of those very tough deciduous shrubs, they've lost the leaves and they flower bare, basically. So rod stew might be bare strutting around the stage. These shrubs will be bare strutting
picture,
as well. I'd rather think about that this time of day, yes, but there we are. So you've got things like witch hazel and, as I say, the forsythia are looking really good at the moment. Very low maintenance plants, don't do much with those at all. They'll do their thing. And in the summer, they're very plain, very boring, but it's this time of year you see them really spring to life.
Absolutely, and particularly if you haven't cut them in the autumn, because that's what you want to do, particularly with the forsythia, isn't it? Is to keep it because it will flower on the old wood. Yeah,
I mean, hamamelis tends to flower better when it's older, so you're better off leaving the wood, and that is very slow to grow, so which is why you'll pay a lot more for witch hazels in garden centres, because the amount of growing time they've had. But forsythias, it's worth cutting, perhaps if they're getting too straggly, you can't cope with the big sprawling yellow branches, cut some of them back one year and then cut some back the other year, so you've got a constant supply of decent stems that'll give you flower. They can be cut really hard back, and just after flowering is a good time to do it, so any time in the next 4 to 6 weeks you could cut those back and get them ready for next year, because they've got a full growing season ahead of them from there then.
And when you talk about a big shrub, it's generally the advice, isn't it, that you cut back a third down to ground level.
Depends how brave you are.
Yeah, it is a bit of a scary thing, isn't it? I find that. But I think it's a process. I think as a gardener, you start off being quite timid, but then you get to the point where you go,
That's
going to do
it's
it.
what they call the Chelsea chop later in the summer.
That's
So
right.
people hack things almost back to ground level and they'll come up again within a few weeks. Don't do that with everything. I haven't told you that for every plant known to man. But certainly roses you cut right back down at the end of the season. I mean, we cut ours back to maybe 2 or 3 inches from the ground, and that's for all bush roses. Climbers be a bit more wary about, and maybe things like clematis. But shrubs are generally fairly forgiving. They will grow eventually, but you might just find you lose the flowers for a few years. Remember years ago when I was still learning a lot about gardening, I cut my mother's hydrangea plants right down to the ground, thinking I was tidying the garden up, and they never flowered for 4 years after.
Do you know, I was just going to say, there are certain plants that you shouldn't be pruning now,
some
like
you should leave completely alone,
Mm.
Leave those to do their thing, and then once they finish, give them a light trim. But generally, the faster growing generally the shrub is, the more you can cut it back. If it's a slow growing shrub, just go easy on it, just be careful.
And I think if you're a beginner listening to this, a good message is don't prune it till after flowering, because that's a general rule, isn't it?
Yeah. So things like you said, camellias, you can prune those lightly after they've flowered because they will need a full season to recover. But then if you've got anything deciduous that's perhaps not come into leaf yet, and there's still maybe a week or two before some things have come into leaf, you can cut those back quite hard. So fruit trees, ornamental trees, anything that's deciduous and dormant, you can generally cut back now because it's just before the sap's starting to rise. If you leave it till later on, the sap leaks out and you lose a lot of the moisture content. So it's worth cutting some of that stuff back now. But if you're not sure, give us a shout.
Absolutely, go and pop in and
That's
get some
it.
advice.
Yeah, no problem
Absolutely,
at
that's
all.
what you're there for.
Yep.
And I think that's a really good point, isn't it? Now is a good time to be looking in the structure of your garden and just going, okay, is there a bit of pruning that I need to do here while things are dormant?
Yeah.
So it's, take a sort of general picture before things start growing.
Yeah, it's just after Christmas. It's a good time. It's a bit too cold and wet to get out and do many things, but it's worth planning ahead for the season ahead. And then if you need to remove anything, it's a lot easier to take plants when they haven't got anything on them than to try and get your head stuck in all the leaves in the middle of July when the plants are full of leaf.
Yeah.
Just lift them out early while the weather's not so good, and then obviously you've got plenty of space to start doing a new project for the spring ahead then.
Fabulous. I think we're starting to touch on the jobs that we can be doing at the moment, but on Sowing and Growing we have a section called Get Your Gloves On. So let's really get into that now, Byron. What jobs can people be doing now, do you think, at this time of year?
So one, don't do the lawn just yet.
Yeah.
As I mentioned at the start of the show.
And that's good. A don't is as good as a do, isn't it? So don't do the lawn.
Don't get on the lawn yet. You can start to cut back those shrubs if you want to. Now is a good time to start giving a bit of an early feed. So as soon as the plants do come back to life again, they've got a food supply. So if you've got especially older shrubs and maybe perennial plants that haven't been fed for a while, you'd be amazed. When I used to do my gardening talks years ago, people would say, I've got a such and such shrub. It's 20 years old and it's looking a bit poor. It's looking a bit weak, doesn't flower very well. And I said, when did you feed it last? And they look at me blank. And then when did you water last? And then you feel like shining a big spotlight into their face and saying, if I had been fed for 20 years, I'd be dead by now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So spring is a good time to get the feeds on. So things like if you got organic chicken manure feed, a couple of handfuls of that around all your shrubs would be good. Things like acid-loving plants like your camellias, forest flame plants, heathers, they're like acid food. So now is a good time to get some ericaceous food or a couple of handfuls of compost around your plants. And then as soon as they come back to life again and the rain leaches those nutrients through to the root system, they'll respond to that and then grow quite nicely for the season ahead. So that's one thing you can be doing, is to get a feed or think about feeding, especially those old shrubs. Sowing seeds, things like annual plants that need a bit of a longer time to mature. So you've got things like lobelia, busy lizzies, all of which will be flowering in May time, do need quite a long growing period to get going. So usually January, February. So January, you'd be sort of buying the seeds and planning what you're doing. And then once you're into February, then that's when you can sow them indoors. Also things like vegetable seedlings and things, and no harm in starting some of those off later in February, ready for going outside. Or if you've got a greenhouse or somewhere sheltered, you can grow some salad crops from now on, really. They won't take long to grow. Things like lettuce, radishes, beetroot, all the quick maturing things. They'll tolerate quite low levels of temperature, so it doesn't matter if you haven't got a really hot greenhouse. If it's cold and dry, but well ventilated at least, because obviously the costs of fuel and electric nowadays, people don't heat the greenhouses very much anymore.
No.
So if you've got maybe a 6x8 greenhouse and you can put the window up and keep the door open when the weather is good to allow some ventilation through, start sowing your seeds now. Hardy annual seeds can go in from the end of this month onwards as well, and they are very cheap, very easy, low maintenance, the kind of thing that most gardeners want. Even if they like plants, they like something easy and quick, don't they?
Absolutely. Well, you've mentioned a greenhouse. What if you haven't got a greenhouse? How are you going to start your seeds off then, do you think?
So if you've got somewhere sheltered outdoors that's pretty much out of the wind and out of a lot of the rain, even if it's a sheltered corner somewhere, perhaps at the base of a wall or something like that, that you can start to sow the hardier seeds. I wouldn't be recommending like the tender like I mentioned, lobelia and basilises, they need more heat. So try and start those off on the windowsill indoors, indoors if you can. But otherwise, the hardy annual seeds will start to germinate outside from the end of this month onwards. So you can get around that. You can also buy little mini greenhouses as well, but do anchor those down. I've had no end of people end up, the greenhouse has moved 3 houses down the street when the wind's blown, so anchor them down well if you're going to do that.
We had exactly that. We moved into a new house, put the greenhouse outside the back patio doors, and we watched a Doctor Who episode, my young son.
Right.
And we turned to look at the patio, and the greenhouse was going across the patio.
Replaced by a trampoline from 3 doors down as well.
Yeah.
So there are options if you haven't got the heat or the space potentially. Just hold fire and another month or so, once we get into the March sort of time, you can then sow direct into the ground outside. Doesn't matter what the weather does then, really, because they will come through that anyway. One
common problem, I think, with doing seedlings indoors, particularly if you haven't got a greenhouse, is damping off.
Yes.
What are your tips about avoiding that?
Ventilation is the main thing. So if you've got things like a propagator with a covered lid, like a clear plastic lid, as soon as those seeds are through, you need to be either removing that lid or certainly ventilating the top of that lid so the airflow can get through. You used to be able to buy fungicide many years ago. You could water on to stop that problem, but obviously as we've gone on, the years have gone on, a lot of chemicals have disappeared. Things that could cure us can now kill us, apparently. So a lot of things you can't buy anymore. So ventilation, and also keep an eye on how wet your compost is. A lot of people, and this is true for house plants and a lot of indoor plants generally, if they get too much water, they'll just die. So go easy on the watering. Don't feel you've got to water the plants every day. A lot of seeds, once they've had their initial watering in, you can leave them until they're germinated. The compost might look dry, but there's enough energy in those seeds to keep them going, certainly for the first couple of weeks at least. So I wouldn't worry too much about overwatering. Just keep that in mind, that's all.
That's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah. Just hold back on the watering.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Now, one thing we like to talk about on Sowing and Growing is what projects can we be doing now? So if somebody's thinking, I want to brighten my garden up a bit, or want to do something this weekend, what would you recommend?
Well, if you want instant colour, planted at pots the way to go. So you want to get yourself just a plain terracotta pot, say a 15-inch wide pot, something like that, and then pop down to the garden centre, if you've got some at home anyway, get some primroses, pansies, conifers, heathers, any spring bulbs. You'll have ready grown spring bulbs in the gardens, and so if you missed your chance in the autumn to buy the dry bulbs in a paper bag, now's the time to get them ready grown. A small pot full, cost you a couple of pounds. You can just drop that into a pot, instant colour, and once it's finished in there, you can then replant that clump of bulbs out in your borders for the years to come. And it's a good long-term investment, and you've got little pockets of bulbs in your borders to follow on. So container gardening is good. Obviously brings a bit of instant colour to your patio and your borders. Otherwise, you could, if you wanted something low maintenance, get a large shrub in a pot, and that's just simple. Just get a pot and a shrub and plant it. You haven't even got to do much in the way of sort of messing around with compost. You can just transplant in some general multi-purpose compost and pick something that's in bud now, and then that'll be in flower every spring. And if you do that, they always used to say, if you go to the garden, and it's not a sales ploy, go to a garden centre about 6 times a year and pick out each visit what's looking good each time you go, and over the course of 12 months you'll build up a 12-month range of colour, and a lot of those can be used in pots, and once they've served their purpose in the pots, or maybe you've downsized or moved house, you can then plant those pots out into the garden, or just get a new selection of pots.
And I think, picking up from what you've said, you can actually buy those ready grown pots of bulbs and pop them in the border anyway. If you don't want to make a pot, you can just put them straight in.
A lot
and
of people
fill
forget
gaps.
to plant, or they run out of time, or perhaps the weather isn't so good and they haven't been able to plant. They're available from now through until about the end of March, early part of May, I guess, for some of the later tulip bulbs you could. And again, like I said, once you've planted them, you've got them for years to come. They'll grow. You can divide the clumps of bulbs eventually. But again, feed them. Once they finish flowering, give them a feed with some bone meal, encourage the root system to grow. The bigger the plant, the bigger the flower. That's what they say. So the bigger you can get your bulbs, which is why the bulbs you see in the garden centres are the very, very big ones, and the bulbs you see in some other lesser shops, shall we say, some smaller or some larger chains of plant shops that offer things at a cheaper price. You might buy a bulb half the size, but it's going to be a puny little thing, and it's not going to grow a lot. So the bigger the bulb, the bigger the flower.
And I think, when it comes to finding gaps in gardens, we're pretty good, aren't we?
Yeah,
we
there's
can
always
find
room luckily for my sales pitch, there's always room for one more.
Stuck in some bulbs.
Yes.
And just going back to what you were saying about buying a shrub to put in a pot.
Yeah.
So say I'm buying a shrub in a decent sized plastic pot from the garden centre. What kind of size of ceramic or terracotta pot should I be putting it in? So, for example, should I have an inch gap around the outside? Should it be bigger than that to give this plant room to grow in the pot?
Depends how often you want to be repotting. Ideally, a couple of inches either side and a bit more depth as well. Or you could go for a similar diameter pot, but if it's deeper, it's got more root system to grow. So as long as you give it some room to grow for at least 12 to 18 months, that's a good start.
Yeah.
And you can always top dress the compost later on, or apply a liquid feed later on. The main problem with shrubs in pots is they're going to run out of food at some point because you're watering and the nutrients will leach out of the hole in the bottom.
Yeah.
So you've got to keep on top of the food supply, going back to that food we were talking about earlier on. Worth feeding them with a liquid feed every so often. But generally, a pot of about 15 to 18 inches is a good plant pot size for a long-term shrub, something 3 to 4 years. Other things we need replacing more often, but also it can depend on how fast the shrub will grow. So like a Japanese maple and Acer, they are generally very slow. People use them for bonsai, therefore they don't need big pots, which is why you see them in the very small trays. And if you lift them out of those trays, the root system is very condensed, but it doesn't matter because they are happy to be in that kind of position. Some people trim the roots on some shrubs as well. Obviously, if you've got a climbing plant, that needs to be a big pot, because if the pot isn't big enough, the plant's not going to climb. Same for climbing roses. Patio roses, fine in small pots because they're ultimately small plants. One exception might be palm trees. For example, if you've got like a Chamaerops palm, which is the big fan palm, or the Torbay palm, some people call them. In nature, they don't have a naturally big root system. They're not deeply rooted, so they don't need a big root system to grow. So you could get those in if your space is restricted. They wouldn't need to be potted very often at all. But generally, the bigger the shrub's going to grow, the bigger the pot you're going to let it. Obviously, you can keep on going and going and going. You've got a pot 4 foot wide and you can't get it out of the garden. But generally, if you've got a pot around about 2 foot wide maximum, that should be enough for the majority of the shrubs that we sell, I guess, yes.
It's a quick break before we carry on with the podcast. If you don't mind subscribing and liking and commenting, that'd be really helpful for us on the channel. On Let's Go!
Perfect. No, that's really helpful. And I think realising that you've got to think ahead to how the plant's going to grow, and that helps you decide which pot is the right one for you. Exactly. And of course, remembering that if you want to move it around the garden. Yeah,
moving it is an issue. You can get nowadays, there are what we call fibre clay pots, which are lighter weight pots than traditional clay and terracotta would be. Plastic pots have come a long way. There's a lot of recycled plastic pots now, which are very lightweight and actually look very realistic. We've got some in work now which look like concrete from a distance, but they are actually very, very lightweight, to the point you can throw them around. Not that I do throw the pots at the staff and the customers, but if you get the urge, you can do it. Yes,
we've not recommended the throwing around of pots, have we? But I think as well, going back to the benefits of those, terracotta pots can crack in the frost, can't they? And
they can do.
The benefit of these plastic ones is that they
for my sins, that's what keeps me in business sometimes. If you get a good strong wind or a storm and it knocks all the pots over, they can crack. Fibre clay pots generally have got a bit of a mesh inside, so they do hold their shape. But eventually, obviously, with the plant root system swelling up and the constant water freezing and thawing and that will make the pots crack. So they've got a limited shelf life. One other quick thing to mention about pots as well, if you are going to put in plants for long term, think about the top of your pot. So if it's incurved at the top, think about how you're going to get that plant out of the pot when it's fully rooted. Sometimes you have to destroy the pot to get the root system out. So if you think you're going to repot, go for a typical vase shape, which is like a V shape. Avoid the incurve at the top. If you're happy just to not worry about it and think about it later, that's fine. But I've known people who've had to smash what they thought was a very valuable pot because they've let the plant grow in it too long.
What a dilemma.
So, and it looks like one of these ancient Greek urns, which has got all the green algae growing on the side of it. And it looks really expensive, but they've actually got to smash it to get the plant out. So keep that in mind, just in case. I thought
you were going to say, when you started talking then, I thought you were going to say, don't forget to leave that gap.
It is worth leaving the gap as well,
yes. For watering.
But just keep an eye on how long that plant's been in that pot, because if it does need repotting, it can be a bit of a nightmare.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm learning a lot through this podcast. This is fantastic. You were doubting yourself as an expert, but I think you're showing
the light
a
switch
lot
back
of knowledge.
on now. I think I've been out of practice talking
This is a
for
good
a while.
moment. Yeah,
yes.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. Now, another thing we like to focus on as part of Sowing and Growing podcast is wildlife and wildlife gardening and supporting wildlife in our garden. And we call that a walk on the wildlife side.
Right.
What would you say are things that people can be doing at the moment to support wildlife in their gardens?
So in terms of things coming into flower, anything early spring flower is a good source of nectar for the early insects that are up and about. So things like primroses, especially the native primroses, are coming into flower now. And we've also got things like cyclamen, the very hardy cyclamen are still in flower. So a lot of those will be providing some food for your insects and your sort of pollinating
crocus
insects.
As well, maybe?
Crocuses, especially on sunny days, the flowers can open up quite wide actually. If there's a bit of sun, even if it's cold, those flower petals will open quite wide, and you'll find, I know we find in the garden centre, a lot of bees tend to hibernate in the greenhouse, and we find very lazy bees, and Jenny works for me. She's very very often we'll feed them sugar water to revive them and then put them on a plant that's coming into flower. Brilliant. So it is worth keeping an eye out for those bumbles that have been hibernating either on your shed floor or in a corner in the greenhouse somewhere, and just keep seeing how they're doing and maybe try and wake them up a bit and get them to go outside to do their thing.
Them on your crocus.
Exactly.
It's a lovely sight. I do love that first sight of a big bumblebee on a crocus plant. It's
she goes as far as taking tweezers to take the cobwebs off the bees in our shop as well, because there are quite a few cobwebs every so often. So
word's going to get around. They're all going to be there, aren't they?
It. So the sugar water,
nice
which wasn't that. I think that was something on Dragon's Den, wasn't they? Were they promoting sugar water or something to do with bees and sugar water? I'm sure this was a couple of series back.
Oh,
I don't know if it actually made it into the production, but
if anyone knows, get in touch with us here at Sowing and Growing. Let us know.
So worth doing that. And then on the bird side, obviously, we sell loads and loads of bird food and feeders and things like that. And keep them topped up, and also just keep an eye on if the weather is cold. Obviously, being February now, it's going to be cold and frosty for at least some of the mornings. Keep in mind that the bird food will freeze. And it's like you trying to bite into an ice lolly. Imagine the birds at 6 o'clock in the morning trying to bite into, some frozen seed or some frozen seaweed fat balls or something like that. So it's even worth taking the feeders in overnight so they don't freeze, and putting them out in the morning when you get up.
That's a great tip.
Yeah,
I've not thought of that.
Yeah, and that's because, again, Jen's our wildlife kind of expert, and she loves the birds, and she's always topping the bird feeders up and giving them different food, but a lot of them are bought in, partly because you've got squirrels as well that will eat all that food.
Take it, yeah.
So
another thing to watch out, of course, is when we've had heavy rain, the feeders can get affected by that. Food can rot, can't it?
Yeah, and the birds won't touch rotten food. They're connoisseurs. They will know what they're like.
Yeah.
So it is worth keeping the feeders cleaned. And obviously you can take a lot of these feeders, you can take right apart, either put them in the dishwasher. Doesn't sound very good, but it does sterilise them. It's fine. You can put it with your washing in your general breakfast dishes. And then give them a good wash or just some hot water, hot soapy water, and leave them dry. And try and leave them dry out naturally, because obviously if there's any moisture left, that'll just get soaked up by the seed. Yeah. And you'll be back to square one. So keep an eye on those. A lot of bird feeders now have got drainage holes in the bottom anyway to leave the excess run out, but not all of them will have that. No. So just keep a check on what you've got.
And I find as well it helps not to put too much food in. So if you can be vigilant and actually keep checking your feeders, you're less likely to have food going off and go to waste.
We've steered clear. We were able to buy a while back some, I think they were 2 foot long or 3 foot long bird feeders. It would cost you an arm and a leg to fill them anyway, for starters. And if you've got loads and loads of birds, fine. But ultimately, a lot of that food will go to waste. So just don't be tempted by these massive bird feeders that hold 3 ton of food, because they'll cost you a fortune for starters and you end up wasting a lot of it. So just be wary. Yeah.
And also, as gardeners, we want to provide natural food sources. So we want habitat for insects, we want berries, don't we? So actually seeing generally putting out bird feeders as topping up what we've given them in nature, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a good season, this season just gone. Is it called a fast autumn, where the weather's been good and the conditions have been that they've buried things have produced a lot more than they would normally. It's just been, I'm sure they called it a fast autumn or fast harvest or something like that. And that applies to things like crab apples, pyrocanthus, anything with a berry on skim ears, viburnums.
There's a lot of pyracantha berries in our garden, and cotoneaster too. And I think it's great feast for the birds. The blackbirds particularly like those, don't they?
That's it. Yeah, there we go.
Fabulous. Well, I'm going to introduce you to something that you may not have heard of yet, Byron, and that is the Sowing and Growing Community Compost Heap. Have you heard of it before?
No, sounds interesting.
Well,
not full of rotten people, is it?
It's not your average compost heap. Okay. When you're making your compost heap on the garden, you're putting good things on there.
Yeah.
Your vegetable peelings, your organic matter, a bit of cardboard, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, on this Sowing and Growing compost, we like to build our compost heap with good deeds and kindness associated with gardening. Right. So I've got a few stories that I'm going to share with you all now.
Okay.
And hopefully you'll enjoy them. So first of all, I'd like to highlight some New Year health and wellbeing activities which are happening at St Anne's in Chasetown. And because we gardeners, we love the benefits of the outdoors, don't we? And as New Year turns to health and fitness, St Anne's Church and Community Hub in Chasetown is highlighting its wide programme of physical and mental wellbeing activities which are available to the whole community. They offer a chance to connect with nature and with other people on wellbeing walks for men and for women. There's also a strollers buggy walk, and they all set off from St Anne's. There's a creative session, there's a welcome cafe, and if that wasn't enough, there's a community garden too.
Excellent. Get your hands dirty while you're walking.
Absolutely. All at the same time. So the community garden is also in association with Burntwood Be a Friend, and it's open to all on Thursdays at 10 a.m. The sessions offer gentle physical activity while helping to develop and maintain the garden space at St Anne's. And they say everyone is welcome to be part of this friendly and supportive community. So if you'd like to get involved in that at all, for more information, please email stanneschurch@hotmail.co.uk. That's stanneschurch@hotmail.co.uk. Or you can call 01543 686 111. That's 01543 686 111. And here's a lovely story about a Christmas tree recycling scheme. An annual scheme to recycle Christmas trees has helped to raise more than £100,000 for St Giles Hospice.
Excellent. Our local
Fabulous.
hospice, yeah, just down the road, yeah.
Yeah. Its Tree Cycle project saw volunteers collect, well, how many trees do you think they might have collected from the local area, Byron? Any idea?
Well, we sell a fair few hundred every year, and I know lots of them do stay within Lichfield, and we do push the Tree Cycle campaign as well. So I would have said at least 300-400 maybe.
Wow, it was 5,800
just a bit out there.
trees.
Right, okay, excellent.
Isn't that incredible?
That's very good news, that one.
And they were collected in exchange for donations, and the trees were then recycled and turned into compost for agricultural purposes. And Sam Colclough, who is the Senior Events Officer at St Giles Hospice, said, this fantastic response, and I think they had their best response ever this year, shows how much our community cares about supporting local people at the end of their lives. Every tree collected represents a family choosing to support St Giles. We're incredibly grateful. And also a huge thank you to the 150 volunteers and all the supporters who helped to fund this vital care for families when they need it most.
Excellent project.
Isn't that fantastic?
And what do you do with your Christmas tree after Christmas? I mean, it's a bit
Absolutely.
hard. It's a bit of an effort to chop it all up in the bin, for starters.
it is.
Although if you have missed out on Tree Cycle this year, they'll be doing it again, I'm sure, at the end of the year.
Absolutely.
But also, if your tree hasn't been collected, leave it in the corner of the garden because it'll probably stay green for another couple of months yet anyway. I remember when I missed out one year, I think it was still green in April, and the birds were nesting in it, even though it was technically
That's
dead
great.
because
I
it was
love
cut. So you can do that. And also, I think they're quite good for alpaca feed. So if you've got an alpaca, as everybody does in the back garden, I know of one garden centre that donates quite a few to the local alpaca farm, and they chew on them and they chew all the needles off. So,
well, I tell you what, every day's a school day, isn't it?
I'm full of useless information like this,
Please, will you come back and talk to us some more?
I might listen.
Oh, it's been wonderful to have you on today, Byron. Thank you so much for coming to join us.
No problem.
And I'd like to end with a few quotes. And as I say, I think you have lived up to being an expert today. So, and when it comes to gardening, I don't feel like an expert, but I am enthusiastic to keep learning. And so to end today's podcast, I've picked a couple of quotes about this opportunity that gardening gives us all for learning. The first one comes from the actress Helen Mirren, who says, gardening is learning, learning, learning. That's the fun of them. You're always learning.
I would second that,
yeah,
yes.
Are you still learning?
Yes, yeah. More than I ever did in college. Yeah, say something, doesn't it?
And then I've got another quote from Gertrude Jekyll, who says, a garden is a grand teacher. It teaches patience and careful watchfulness. It teaches industry and thrift. Above all, it teaches trust.
Excellent.
It's very reflective, something to sort of think about, isn't it, that?
Yeah. I've got one quote for you.
Oh, go on.
Whose source I can't remember, actually.
That's
but
all right.
A weed is only a plant growing in the wrong place.
Absolutely.
And
do you know what?
I don't know who said that, but
I don't, but I know it too. And I think as we get more interested in wildlife gardening, in leaving long areas of grass, in the benefit of nettles for butterflies, I think we all feel that more than ever. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Well, finally, I've tried to combine here your dance music connections with
be
gardening
okay, right.
in these final quotes. Firstly, I love this one from George Santayana, the philosopher, poet and novelist, who says, the earth has music for those who will listen. Isn't that great?
They obviously have listened to my music then before.
And finally, from the poet and filmmaker Susan Polish-Schutz, she said, let us dance in the sun wearing wildflowers in our hair, which as I'm sure is how we're going to find you at the Garden Centre at the weekend.
But not in daylight hours anyway, definitely.
Well, it's something for us to think about, isn't it? Thank you so much, Byron, for joining me today. It's been wonderful to have you. Thank you for listening, and until we meet again, keep sowing and growing. I'm your host, Iona Chisholm. Goodbye.